The gym was alive with the rhythmic thump of basketballs hitting the polished hardwood floor, the squeak of sneakers echoing against the walls. High above, the school's faded championship banners hung like reminders of a legacy long past, their colors dulled by years of dust and neglect. The team practiced tirelessly, their faces set in determined frowns, sweat glistening on their brows. Among them was Malik Johnson, his movements fluid and precise, a natural athlete in every sense of the word. At 17, Malik was already a standout, a name whispered in the hallways and around town with the kind of reverence reserved for those destined for greatness. He was quick, agile, and had an instinct for the game that couldn't be taught. Every time he had the ball, it was like watching art in motion, each dribble, pass, and shot executed with effortless grace. Yet, despite his undeniable talent, something was off. Johnson. Quit showboating and pass the ball, Coach Tom Rogers' voice cut through the gym like a whip crack, sharp and stinging. The team's head coach was a man of few words but many rules, and one of his unspoken rules was clear: he didn't care for Malik Johnson. Malik's brow furrowed slightly, but he did as he was told, passing the ball to Brad, the team captain. The play continued, but the energy shifted. Malik knew he wasn't showboating, he was just playing the game the only way he knew how, with passion and skill. But Coach Rogers always found something to criticize, especially when it came to Malik. On the sidelines, Brad glanced over at Malik, his expression a mix of sympathy and helplessness. Brad was the golden boy, the one who never got yelled at, the one Coach Rogers groomed for greatness. He was good, no doubt about that, but even he knew Malik was better. Everyone did. Yet Malik remained on the sidelines, often ignored or unfairly criticized, while Brad and the others took center stage. As the practice continued, the divide grew more apparent. Malik was isolated, not just physically, but mentally. The other players, conscious of Coach Rogers' favoritism, kept their distance, not wanting to be on the wrong side of the coach's ire. It wasn't just about basketball anymore, it was about something deeper, something uglier that Malik could feel but couldn't always name. The drills wound down and Coach Rogers called the team in, clipboard in hand. "Listen up," he began, his eyes sweeping across the group, landing briefly on Malik before moving on. "We've got the regional championship coming up, and I need everyone at their best. No room for mistakes, no room for egos." Malik swallowed his frustration, knowing exactly who the last part was directed at. He had been nothing but a team player, but in Coach Rogers' eyes, his confidence was mistaken for arrogance, his skill for showmanship. "Brad, your running point as usual. Keep it tight, keep it clean," Coach Rogers continued. "We'll run the usual plays. Johnson, you're benched for this one." The words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. He had been benched before, but not like this, not before the most important game of the season, the game where NBA scouts might be watching. He opened his mouth to protest but quickly closed it. Talking back would only make things worse. "Coach, are you sure?" Brad spoke up, his voice cautious. It was rare for anyone to question Coach Rogers, but even Brad seemed to think this was too far. "Malik's our best player." Coach Rogers shot Brad a look that silenced any further argument. "I've made my decision," he said firmly. "Johnson needs to learn his place. This is a team, not a one-man show." Malik stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. It wasn't fair, but fairness had never been part of the equation when it came to Coach Rogers. As the team dispersed, heading to the locker room, Malik lingered behind, the weight of the coach's words settling heavily on his shoulders. The gym was empty now, the echoes of the earlier practice fading into silence. Malik stood alone, his mind racing. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, but he forced it down, knowing that anger wouldn't help him. Instead, he grabbed a ball and started shooting hoops, each shot a release of the frustration building within him. One shot after another, the ball swished through the net with perfect precision. But there was no one to see it, no one to recognize the talent that Coach Rogers refused to acknowledge. As the night wore on, Malik's determination only grew stronger. He wouldn't give up. He couldn't. This was his dream, and no one, not even Coach Rogers, was going to take it from him. The days leading up to the regional championship passed in a blur for Malik. While the rest of the team was busy preparing under Coach Rogers' watchful eye, Malik was left to his own devices. The sting of being benched was ever present, a constant reminder that no matter how hard he worked, he was still seen as less than his teammates. But Malik wasn't one to back down. Every morning before school, he was the first one at the gym, running drills and working on his shot. Every afternoon, after the team's practice had ended and the gym was empty, he returned to do it all over again. The silence of the empty gym became his sanctuary, the only place where he could channel his frustration into something productive. The only other person who saw Malik's dedication was the school janitor, Mr. Harris, an older man who had seen his fair share of athletes come and go. Mr. Harris had taken a liking to Malik, often staying late just to watch him practice. "You've got heart, kid," Mr. Harris said one evening, as Malik took a break, panting from the exertion. "I've been here a long time and I've seen a lot of players. But you've got something special." "Thanks, Mr. Harris," Malik replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But it doesn't mean much if I'm stuck on the bench." Mr. Harris nodded, understanding the weight of Malik's words. "Coach Rogers has his way of doing things," he said carefully. "But don't let that get in your head. Keep working hard. You never know who's watching." Malik looked at the old man, his heart heavy with doubt. He appreciated the encouragement, but it was hard to stay positive when everything seemed stacked against him. Still, he nodded and gave Mr. Harris a small smile before picking up the ball again. The night before the big game, Malik couldn't sleep. The thought of sitting on the sidelines while his team fought for a chance at the championship gnawed at him. He had worked too hard, given too much, to be reduced to nothing more than a spectator. But there was little he could do. Coach Rogers' decision was final, and arguing would only make things worse. Malik's mother, noticing his unease, knocked on his bedroom door and stepped inside. She was a strong woman, having raised Malik on her own after his father passed away when he was just a boy. She had always been his biggest supporter, attending every game, cheering the loudest no matter the score. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. Malik shook his head. "It's just, I should be playing tomorrow. I know I'm ready. But Coach won't give me the chance." His mother sighed, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're a good player, Malik. But more than that, you're a good person. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Malik nodded, but the frustration lingered. "It's not fair, Mom. I've worked so hard. I just want to show them what I can do." "You will," she said firmly. "Maybe not tomorrow, but one day. You've got a light inside you, Malik. Don't let anyone dim it." Her words were a comfort, but they didn't erase the reality of what he would face the next day. Still, Malik thanked her and tried to get some rest, knowing he would need all his strength for what was to come. The morning of the game arrived, and the school was buzzing with excitement. The regional championship was a big deal win this, and the team would be one step closer to the state finals. The bleachers filled quickly, packed with students, parents, and local fans. The air was electric with anticipation, the smell of popcorn and sweat mingling in the confined space of the gym. Malik dressed in his uniform, the crisp fabric feeling like a second skin. He laced up his shoes with precision, trying to focus on the ritual of preparation rather than the reality that he would be spending most of the game on the bench. The other players were pumped, hyping each other up with chest bumps and high fives, but Malik stayed quiet, his mind elsewhere. As the team filed out onto the court for warm-ups, Malik couldn't help but glance at the stands. His mother was there, as always, her face a beacon of support amidst the sea of cheering fans. But what caught his eye next made his heart skip a beat. Sitting a few rows behind her were several men in suits, each with a clipboard in hand, their eyes scanning the court. NBA Scouts. They were here. Malik's breath caught in his throat. He had heard rumors that Scouts might show up, but he hadn't dared to believe it. And now, here they were, watching his team, and more importantly, watching him. Or at least they would be if he were on the court. Coach Rogers hadn't noticed the Scouts yet, too focused on his team's warm-up drills. Malik felt a surge of hope, a tiny spark, but enough to rekindle his determination. If there was ever a time to prove himself, it was now. But that would mean getting off the bench, and that was something only Coach Rogers could decide. As the game time drew closer, Malik stood with the rest of the team, listening to Coach Rogers' final pep talk. The coach's words were the usual blend of motivational cliches and tactical advice, but Malik barely heard them. His focus was on the Scouts, his mind racing with possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, he would get his shot. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the game, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Malik took his place on the bench, his heart pounding in his chest. The anticipation was almost unbearable. He watched as the starting five took the court. Brad at the point, flanked by the coach's favored players. They were a solid team, but even as they began to move the ball down the court, Malik could see the cracks. The first quarter was rough. The opposing team, known for their aggressive defense and quick transitions, quickly took control of the game. Brad struggled to find his rhythm, and the others were no match for the relentless pressure. Coach Rogers paced the sidelines, his face growing redder with each passing minute, his voice hoarse from shouting instructions that were increasingly desperate. Malik's fingers twitched with the need to do something, anything, to help his team. But all he could do was sit and watch as the point gap widened. The Scouts, sitting stone-faced in the stands, made notes on their clipboards, their expressions giving nothing away. Malik couldn't tell if they were impressed or disappointed, but he knew that if he was out there, the game would be different. By the time the first quarter ended, the team was down by 10 points. The atmosphere in the gym had shifted from excited anticipation to nervous tension. The crowd's cheers had quieted, replaced by murmurs and concerned glances. Coach Rogers gathered the team for a quick huddle, his voice low and tense. "We're better than this," he hissed, glaring at his players. "You're better than this. Get your heads in the game." Brad, breathing heavily, nodded but didn't speak. Malik could see the frustration in his eyes. Brad knew they were in trouble, but he also knew that without Malik, they were outmatched. Still, Brad wasn't the type to challenge Coach Rogers, so he kept his mouth shut and returned to the court with the rest of the starters. The second quarter started much like the first, with the opposing team quickly scoring a series of fast break points. The gap widened to 15, then 20. The Scouts shifted in their seats, their attention flickering between the game and their notes. Malik's stomach twisted with anxiety. He knew this was his moment, but he was still stuck on the bench, powerless to change the outcome. As the game wore on, the frustration among the players became more visible. Passes were missed, shots were blocked, and tempers flared. Coach Rogers, normally a model of stern control, began to lose his composure. He barked orders that went ignored, his face a mask of anger and panic. The team was falling apart, and everyone knew it. With only a few minutes left in the second quarter, Brad missed a crucial shot, and the opposing team capitalized on the rebound, pushing the lead to 25 points. The crowd groaned, and for the first time, boos could be heard from the stands. The Scouts exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed with the performance on the court. Coach Rogers called a timeout, his expression dark and brooding. The team gathered around him, their heads hanging low. Malik stayed on the edge of the huddle, close enough to hear but far enough away to avoid the coach's wrath. "This is embarrassing," Coach Rogers spat, his eyes darting from player to player. "You're letting them walk all over you. Where's the fight? Where's the discipline?" The players didn't respond, their silence a testament to the demoralizing situation. Brad glanced at Malik, a look of desperation in his eyes. Malik knew what Brad was thinking. They needed him. But Coach Rogers' stubbornness was getting in the way. Malik took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that speaking up could backfire, but he couldn't just sit there and watch the team implode. Summoning all his courage, he stepped forward. "Coach, let me play," Malik said, his voice steady but firm. The team looked up, surprised by his boldness, but no one else spoke. Even Brad, who had been the most supportive, remained silent, his eyes flicking nervously between Malik and Coach Rogers. Coach Rogers turned slowly to face Malik, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the two stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, with a sneer, Coach Rogers shook his head. "Not a chance," he said coldly. "You think you can just walk in here and take over? This isn't your show, Johnson. Sit down." Malik's heart sank, but he didn't move. "Coach, we're losing. I can help. Just give me a chance." But Coach Rogers wasn't listening. He waved Malik off dismissively, turning his attention back to the rest of the team. "Get back out there and play like you mean it," he ordered, his voice rising in frustration. "And don't make any more mistakes." The team dispersed, but Malik remained rooted to the spot, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the eyes of the scouts on him, their interest piqued by the exchange, but there was nothing more he could do. Reluctantly, he returned to the bench, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the game and his chance was slipping away. As the second quarter drew to a close, the team continued to struggle. The opposing team, sensing their advantage, pressed even harder, and by halftime, the score was a humiliating 5-0-2-0. The crowd was silent, the energy completely drained from the gym. Malik sat on the bench, his head in his hands, wondering if he would ever get his chance to prove himself. The locker room was eerily quiet during halftime. The usual chatter and pep talk were replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on everyone. The players sat slumped on the benches, staring at the floor, their confidence shattered by the brutal first half. Coach Rogers stood by the whiteboard, marker in hand, but for once he didn't know what to say. The plan had failed, and the team was drowning in its own frustration and disappointment. Malik sat at the far end of the bench, his thoughts a swirling mix of anger, fear, and determination. He knew this was his chance to speak up again, but he also knew that challenging Coach Rogers in front of the entire team could have serious repercussions. Still, the thought of sitting through another half of this disaster without doing anything was unbearable. Finally, Coach Rogers broke the silence. "Listen up," he began, his voice low and strained. "We're not out of this yet. We can still turn this around, but we need to play smarter, harder, and with more focus. We're going back to basics: tight defense, quick passes, and no risky shots." Brad, sitting closest to the coach, nodded wearily. But Malik could see the doubt in his eyes. The team had already given everything they had, and it hadn't been enough. They needed something more, something different. Taking a deep breath, Malik stood up, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Coach," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "I know you don't want to hear this, but we need a change. The way we're playing isn't working, and you know it." Coach Rogers' eyes narrowed, but he didn't immediately shut Malik down. Instead, he crossed his arms and stared at him, waiting to see where this was going. "We're getting killed out there," Malik continued, emboldened by the fact that the coach hadn't immediately dismissed him. "They're too fast, too strong, and we're not keeping up. But I know we can beat them. We just need to play our game, not theirs." The other players exchanged glances, surprised by Malik's assertiveness. Even Brad looked at him with a new sense of respect. Malik was saying what they had all been thinking but hadn't dared to voice. Coach Rogers remained silent for a moment, his expression hard to read. Then, slowly, he uncrossed his arms and leaned against the whiteboard. "And what exactly is our game, Johnson?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Malik didn't hesitate. "Speed, precision, heart. We've got to push the tempo, force them to make mistakes, and capitalize on every opportunity. We can't keep playing it safe. We need to take risks, play aggressively, and trust each other." Coach Rogers raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You think that's all it takes? Just playing faster?" "No," Malik replied, meeting the coach's gaze head-on. "It takes more than that. It takes leadership. It takes someone who's not afraid to step up when it matters most." The room fell silent again, the weight of Malik's words hanging in the air. Coach Rogers' face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, Brad stood up. "Malik's right," Brad said quietly but firmly. "We've been holding back because we're scared of making mistakes. But if we keep playing like this, we're going to lose anyway. We need to give it everything we've got, no matter what." The rest of the team murmured in agreement, the spark of hope rekindled by Brad's support. Malik could feel the momentum shifting, but he knew it all hinged on what Coach Rogers would do next. For a long moment, Coach Rogers said nothing, his eyes locked on Malik's. Then, with a heavy sigh, he finally relented. "All right, Johnson, you want to lead? You've got it, but if you mess this up, it's on you." Malik nodded, barely able to contain his relief. "I won't let you down, Coach." "We'll see about that," Coach Rogers muttered, though his tone was less harsh than before. He turned to the rest of the team. "You heard him. We're changing tactics. Push the tempo, play aggressively, and don't let them breathe. But remember, this isn't a free-for-all. Stay focused, stay disciplined." The team nodded, their spirits lifting. Malik could feel the energy returning to the room, the fire that had been smothered in the first half reigniting. He knew they still had a long way to go, but for the first time that night he believed they could do it. As they filed out of the locker room and back onto the court, Malik felt the eyes of the scouts on him. He didn't know if they were impressed by his leadership or if they were simply curious to see what would happen next. But it didn't matter. All that mattered was the game, and he was ready to give it everything he had. The third quarter began, and the change in the team was immediately apparent. Malik led the charge, pushing the ball up the court with speed and precision, catching the opposing team off guard. His teammates followed his lead, moving with a sense of purpose and urgency that had been missing in the first half. The gap began to close, slowly at first, but then more rapidly as Malik's strategy started to pay off. They forced turnovers, intercepted passes, and made quick, calculated shots that cut into the other team's lead. The crowd, sensing the shift in momentum, came back to life, cheering with renewed enthusiasm as the score began to climb. Coach Rogers, pacing the sidelines, couldn't hide his surprise as he watched Malik take control of the game. For the first time, he saw the player that everyone else had been talking about, the one who could change the course of a game with sheer willpower and talent. But even more than that, he saw a leader, someone who could inspire his teammates to rise above their limits. By the end of the third quarter, the gap had shrunk to just 10 points. The opposing team, once so confident, now looked rattled, their composure starting to crack under the relentless pressure. Malik, drenched in sweat but more determined than ever, gathered his team for a quick huddle. "Keep pushing," he urged, his voice steady but intense. "They're starting to break. We've got them right where we want them. But we can't let up, not for a second. This is our game now." The team nodded, their eyes alight with belief. They could feel it too. The momentum was on their side, and they weren't about to let it slip away. As they prepared for the final quarter, Malik knew that the next few minutes would define not just the game, but possibly his future. The scouts were watching, the crowd was behind them, and the championship was still within reach. All they had to do was finish what they started. The final quarter began with a roar from the crowd, the noise in the gym almost deafening as the teams took their positions on the court. Malik stood at the center, the ball in his hands, his breath steady and focused. The gap was down to 10 points, but he knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The other team wasn't going to roll over, they were going to fight back with everything they had. As the clock ticked down, the intensity on the court reached a fever pitch. Malik directed his team with a calm authority, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay sharp, watch the screens, don't let them get comfortable." The opposing team tried to regain their footing, but Malik's relentless pace kept them on their heels. Every time they attempted to slow the game down, Malik countered with a burst of speed, driving to the basket or dishing out a quick pass to an open teammate. The crowd was on their feet, every basket bringing them closer to the edge of their seats. With just 5 minutes left in the game, the gap had closed to 5 points. Malik could feel the pressure mounting, but he didn't let it shake him. This was what he had trained for, what he had dreamed of, leading his team in the most crucial moments, with everything on the line. The other team, sensing the shift in momentum, called a timeout. Their coach gathered them in a tight huddle, his voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. Malik used the break to catch his breath, his chest heaving from the exertion. His teammates looked at him with a mix of admiration and exhaustion, ready to follow him wherever he led. 5 minutes, Malik said, his voice steady, despite the pounding in his chest. "That's all we need. 5 minutes of everything we've got, and this game is ours." Brad, his face slick with sweat, nodded emphatically. "Let's finish this." As they returned to the court, Malik caught a glimpse of the NBA scouts. They were leaning forward in their seats, their attention fully locked on him. Malik knew this was his moment, the one that could define his future. But he couldn't think about that now, not with the game still in the balance. The timeout ended, and the final stretch of the game began. The other team, desperate to hold onto their lead, tightened their defense, doubling up on Malik every chance they got. But Malik was ready for it. He used their aggression against them, drawing defenders in before kicking the ball out to open teammates, who capitalized with clean, uncontested shots. The gap shrank to 3 points, then 2. The crowd's energy was at its peak, the gym shaking with the force of their cheers. With just over a minute left on the clock, Malik knew they had one last push to make. This was it, everything they had worked for, everything they had fought for, coming down to the final 60 seconds. The opposing team had possession, but Malik wasn't about to let them run out the clock. He pressured the ball handler, forcing a rushed pass that was intercepted by Brad. The gym erupted as Brad sprinted down the court, but instead of taking the shot, he passed it back to Malik, who was trailing behind. Malik caught the ball at the top of the key, the defenders closing in on him. He had a split second to decide drive to the basket or take the shot. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, his focus narrowing to the hoop in front of him. He squared up, the clock ticking down, and launched the shot. Time seemed as slow as the ball arced through the air. The entire gym held its breath, the outcome of the game hanging in the balance. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was his moment. The ball swished through the net, a perfect three-pointer that gave them the lead for the first time in the game. The gym exploded in cheers, the noise almost overwhelming. Malik's teammates swarmed him, their faces alight with joy and relief. But Malik didn't celebrate just yet. There were still 30 seconds left on the clock, and the game wasn't over. The opposing team, stunned by the sudden turn of events, called another timeout. Malik returned to the bench, his heart still racing, but a sense of calm settling over him. He had done it, he had given his team the lead. Now all they had to do was hold on. Coach Rogers, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since allowing Malik to take control, finally spoke up. "Good work out there, Johnson," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "But this isn't over. We need one more stop." Malik nodded, his mind already focused on the next play. The team huddled around Coach Rogers, listening intently as he laid out the defensive strategy. They knew the other team would come out swinging, desperate to reclaim the lead, but Malik wasn't worried. He trusted his teammates, and more importantly, he trusted himself. The final seconds of the game were a blur of motion and adrenaline. The other team made a frantic attempt to score, but Malik and his teammates were everywhere at once, smothering their every move. With just 5 seconds left, Brad tipped a pass, sending the ball into Malik's hands. He dribbled out the clock, the buzzer sounding just as he reached half court. The game was over. They had won. The gym erupted into chaos, the crowd spilling onto the court in celebration. Malik was lifted onto his teammates' shoulders, their cheers echoing in his ears. He had done it. He had led his team to victory when it mattered most. But even in the midst of the celebration, Malik's eyes found the NBA scouts. They were clapping, their expressions unreadable, but Malik knew they had seen everything they needed to see. His future was no longer just a dream, it was within reach. As the celebration continued, the gym was filled with a sense of triumph that could only come from overcoming impossible odds. Malik was still on his teammates' shoulders, but he soon signaled for them to let him down. His feet touched the floor, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They had done it, they had won. But more importantly, Malik had proven himself, not just to Coach Rogers or the scouts, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. The crowd was still cheering, but Malik's focus shifted to the sidelines where his mother stood, beaming with pride. He made his way through the throng of well-wishers, his heart swelling with gratitude as he approached her. "You did it, baby," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight hug. "I knew you could do it." Malik hugged her back, the weight of all his hard work and the struggles he had faced finally lifting from his shoulders. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." She pulled back, tears glistening in her eyes as she cupped his face in her hands. "You're going to go far, Malik. I'm so proud of you." Before Malik could respond, a voice interrupted them. "Excuse me, Malik." He turned to see one of the NBA scouts standing nearby, a tall man with sharp eyes and a serious expression. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away as Malik realized what was about to happen. "I'm Mark Harris with the Cleveland Cavaliers," the scout said, extending his hand. "I've been watching you tonight, and I have to say you've got something special." Malik shook his hand, his mind racing. "Thank you, sir," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're very interested in what you can bring to the table," Harris continued. "I'd love to have a conversation with you and your mother about your future, if you're interested." Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the opportunity he had been dreaming of for years. He glanced at his mother, who was smiling through her tears, and then back at the scout. "I'm definitely interested," Malik said, the words feeling surreal as they left his mouth. "Great," Harris said, handing Malik his card. "Give me a call, and we'll set up a time to meet. You've got a bright future ahead of you, Malik. Keep up the hard work." With that, the scout gave him a nod and disappeared into the crowd. Malik stared at the card in his hand, the realization slowly dawning on him that his life was about to change forever. As the crowd began to disperse, Malik noticed Coach Rogers standing near the entrance to the locker room, watching him with an unreadable expression. Malik knew he had to confront the coach, to close this chapter of his life with no loose ends. He approached Coach Rogers, his steps slow and deliberate. The coach straightened as Malik neared, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Coach," Malik began, his voice calm but firm, "I think we need to talk." Coach Rogers nodded, gesturing for Malik to follow him into the now empty locker room. The door closed behind them, and the noise from the gym was cut off, leaving only the sound of their breathing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Malik could feel the weight of everything that had happened between them pressing down on his shoulders, but he refused to back down. "You played a hell of a game out there," Coach Rogers finally said, his tone grudging but sincere. "You proved me wrong." Malik met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't do it to prove you wrong, Coach. I did it because I love this game, and I knew I could help the team." Coach Rogers looked away, his jaw tightening. "I know I've been hard on you, Malik, maybe too hard. But I want you to know, I respect what you did tonight. You showed real leadership out there." Malik nodded, appreciating the sentiment, but he knew this conversation needed more. "Coach, it's not just about tonight. You've been holding me back for a long time, and I don't think it was just about my attitude or my style of play. I think it was about something else." Coach Rogers flinched, but he didn't deny it. He sighed heavily, the tension in his shoulders visible. "You're right," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I let my own prejudices get in the way. I'm not proud of it, and I can't take back the way I treated you. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." Malik felt a surge of emotions, anger, relief, sadness, but he kept his expression steady. "I appreciate your apology, Coach. But it's not just about me. You can't treat people like that, no matter who they are or where they come from. If you want to be a good coach, you need to see your players for who they are, not just what you think they should be." Coach Rogers nodded slowly, his expression somber. "You're right, Malik, and I'll work on that. I promise." Malik studied the coach's face, looking for any signs of insincerity, but all he saw was a man who had finally recognized his own flaws. It wasn't a complete redemption, but it was a start. "Thank you, Coach," Malik said, extending his hand. "I hope things can be different from now on." Coach Rogers shook his hand, a hint of a smile breaking through his usual stern demeanor. "Me too, Malik. Me too." With that, Malik turned and left the locker room, feeling a sense of closure that he hadn't expected. The night had been one of the most challenging of his life, but it had also been one of the most rewarding. He had faced down his demons, confronted injustice, and come out stronger on the other side. As he stepped back into the gym, the noise of the celebration washed over him again. His teammates were still reveling in the victory, but as they saw Malik, they quickly gathered around him, their respect and admiration clear in their eyes. "You did it," Man Brad said, clapping Malik on the back. "We couldn't have done it without you." Malik smiled, the weight of the night lifting from his shoulders. "We did it together," he replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "This was a team effort." As the celebration continued, Malik couldn't help but think about the future. The NBA Scouts, the opportunities that lay ahead, everything he had ever dreamed of was now within his grasp. But more than that, he knew that he had made a difference, not just in the game, but in the lives of everyone around him. And that, more than anything, was what mattered most.